All right, everyone out there, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's episode of Role Player with a Thousand Faces. I'm your host, Matt Yancik. I'm the founder and head game master here at Manufactured Myth and Legerdemain, and tonight I'm bringing to you the art director at Monte Cook Games. So I have to say, on a personal note, I am very excited to talk to Bear tonight. I've been a big fan. Well, everybody knows this. I'm a big fan of Monte Cook Games. I love just about everything that they do. And one thing that I've always admired in particular is the design of their books. So I, by day, am a English teacher, and so as an English teacher, I'm used to processing like a lot of information, but my brain doesn't really do it very well, and I kind of have all these coping mechanisms to like get through. And one of those coping mechanisms is keeping a teacher's guide very close by. And one thing that I've always loved about the books that Monte Cook and his team put out is that to me, they're very much arranged in the style of a teacher's guide. And for me, they are very quick and easy to navigate. And anyone that has played MCG's games knows that the games are designed to take a lot of the stress off of the game master and allow them to sort of run very quickly and easily and think mostly about story and adventure and action and mystery and all of that stuff. So Bear is the person behind the layout and design. He is art director at Monte Cook Games. Bear, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Yeah, and I must say, ladies and gentlemen, one thing that impressed me about talking with Bear in the last, I think, month or month and a half about this is I sent him questions and he had notes that he sent back to me. And in the history of the show, no one has ever sent me notes back. I don't know if that's an art director thing. I don't know if that's a Bear Weiter thing. We will perhaps drill down on that and get to the bottom of it. But Bear, speaking of drilling down and getting to the bottom, can you kind of tell me? So on your Twitter page, you bill yourself as an illustrator, an animator, a designer, as well as a writer of fantasy, horror, and the weird. So out of all of that stuff, what was maybe your first or maybe your longest love?
It's for me, it's probably creating stories, whether that's visually or, or through text. Um, to be honest, some of that on Twitter, I'm not a huge Twitter person. And so some of that stuff is probably vestigial. I would like to say that I'm writing all the time. I probably haven't written for at least 5 years. So at a certain point, do you actually call yourself a writer? But
Right.
I've published some stuff. I've been in probably 15 or 20 anthologies. And so, I feel like I've actually been paid to write. So I feel like it's still fair to call myself a writer. But yeah, I don't know what was the first one. Um, I've probably done a lot more in the world of art, whether that's graphic design or illustration or animation or whatever, certainly than I have writing.
Right. And so could you tell me, and now I don't mean to sort of hop over here a little bit, but you wrote that you're a writer of the weird. What did you mean by that?
So the weird to me is it's it's often probably the most associated with horror.
Hmm.
But so many people have this sense that horror is meant to be scary. It's there to thrill you or scare you or, make you not want to turn off the lights or whatever. But the weird to me encompasses horror, really. Things like, say, Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation series, that is a really good example of the weird. It does certainly have lots of strong horror elements, but it's more than that. It's unsettling. It leaves you with questions. It's not one that there's something more to it. And so I kind of see the weird as a slightly larger umbrella than, say, horror would be.
Right. And I guess I would very much agree with that. And I think what's interesting to me is that when you mention this, and I'm sort of thinking about the whole kind of Monte Cook Games kind of line. And in a way, I see everything that they do. I don't know if weird is the appropriate word, but it's definitely a very original and kind of like different take on
Right.
the thing that might be done. So
Sure.
science
Oh, sure.
fiction, say, it comes in the form of, say, Numenera, which isn't exactly science fiction and isn't exactly fantasy, and it is very strange. And well, of course, there is the strange,
Right. Of
which is
course. Yep.
strange itself. So in that respect, do you kind of feel like you're kind of fitting in really well with the team then, and maybe with like Monte Cook and maybe his vision and Shauna's visions and everybody else's?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've been here for 7.5 years. Clearly, something must be working and gelling pretty well. But it is certainly something that I do appreciate and respect with what it is that we create here. That it's rare that we have something that's, say, really just a straight up sci-fi thing or
Right.
a fantasy thing. We've done that certainly now, but even then, there's still this injection of something that's a little just weirder or a little bit off with it. Numenera, one of the big terms that we would often use when we were describing it, and certainly when I'm describing it to artists, even now when we're trying to get new art produced for it, is weird. It would be really hard for someone to go too weird for us. And you're right. I think that element is pervasive through pretty much everything that we do, really. And I think it'd be a little boring if it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
There's tons of companies that are already doing, really good straight up fantasy. There's
Right.
no need for us to be, fully only just that.
Yeah.
So,
And there's no reason to really just sort of repeat the same thing that everybody
right.
else is doing, and you want to
Right.
put your own kind of spin and flavor on it.
Yep.
Do you think then, let me ask you, so from a child, were you into the weird, or was this something that sort of developed over time, or?
I mean, all those things, clearly end up developing over time at some point. I think for me, it was probably, some of the early influences. Everybody, of course, reads Tolkien when they're young.
Mm-hmm.
I think pretty much right after I'd read Tolkien, I was really into Michael Moorcock's work.
Mm.
And so, and Moorcock's stuff was definitely quite a bit weirder, quite a bit different than that traditional Tolkien-esque kind of take on the fantasy world. And Moorcock definitely had a lot of influence on me. The whole sense of the multiverse and this eternal champion and all of that. That was definitely a pretty big influence on me when I was young, and certainly carries today.
Are you still, I mean, I take it that you must be a pretty avid reader of stuff these days, or do you find that you're pretty busy with your work, or?
Yeah, boy, I'd really like to say yes. I really should say yes, but no. I think so. When I really started getting back into writing back in around 2010, and
Mhm.
I found that I could write some stories, I can get them sold, and uh, and while it's, I think, really important to be a good reader to make yourself a good writer, for some reason, writing felt like it needed to, reading needed to drop off for me to keep going with writing. So I wasn't feeling like I was unduly influenced by something. Like I would read something, it's like, oh, okay, now I want to write a pastiche to that,
Right.
or something in that vein, or whatever. And it wasn't, I don't think, a direct conscious choice, but it was something that seemed to happen. And then, of course, when I ended up not writing anymore, I think just between the workload pressures, the hooks that social media puts into you, all of these things seem to kind of conspire to damage my ability to sit and enjoy something for like
Yeah.
long periods of time. I mean,
Yeah.
I find that even with like when I'm watching a movie or TV, it has to be so engrossing for
Yeah.
me not to have like my phone in front of me.
Right.
And it's a horrible thing.
Yeah.
And so at some point I'll need to kind of go through a deprogramming stage and remove those hooks again. I've been better at like reducing my social media presence, the doom scrolling and all of
Yep.
that.
Yep. I
But it's all of that stuff really has worked itself to the point where I it's rare that I read, and that's a shame.
Yeah, I actually I have to be honest, I sort of feel the same way about myself. Like I feel like the things that you're saying, one thing that actually it's sort of a pact that my girlfriend and I have sort of made with each other. We're trying in the mornings when we wake up. Like it's so easy to pick that phone up, right? Because
Oh,
I don't know
sure.
about you, but I use it as my alarm clock.
Hmm.
And for a while I switched to like an old just a radio alarm clock so I couldn't scroll and I'd have to put it in another room. But I fell back into that habit. One thing we've been trying to do is when we get up, we just turn the alarm off and then like I open up a I'm we're getting up like 20, 30 minutes earlier and then we just open up a book, like an
Nice.
old-fashioned book. It's baby steps.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
going, but
Yeah.
but I totally identify with what you're saying, and I feel like it's kind of sucked away some of the pleasure I would get from a longer term pleasure, like just reading for a couple of
Yeah.
hours.
Yeah. It's
Um,
it's weird. It's just that thought of sitting and spending like all afternoon or afternoon and evening just reading a book, something that I would have used to do 15 years ago. Now it just seems like, wow, I can't afford that kind of time.
yeah,
It's a dumb thought, but it's there.
right.
And clearly I need to work on, fixing that up.
Yeah, I think to be honest, I think we all need to work on it to
Yeah.
some extent.
Right. Yeah.
But let me ask you this then. So was it primarily were you kind of like when you were a kid, what did you want to be? Did you want to be that writer? Did you want to be a creator? Did you want to be an illustrator? Was there something in particular that you were sort of thinking?
Um, I probably leaned more toward, well, again, it probably varied. But yeah, I think by the time I was like in the high school level of thinking, where you're starting to maybe actually really think about these things,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to, you have the job of the week kind of idea as a kid. Um, uh, Writing was certainly very much an interest, but art seemed to be something that I felt like I was able to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
In high school, I took all of the art classes to the point where I kind of had to audit some of the classes just to be able, like, essentially retake them without credit, or be for one semester, I was the art teacher's assistant.
Cool.
Um, I was taking some college classes in high school, some Saturday morning life drawing classes, which was really cool. Um, uh, so art and kind of the whole world of art, graphic design, and all of those things uh, were the thoughts that I figured where I would probably end up. Some of this was driven from probably from about 10 or 11 years old. My mom ran a publishing company, at first with her sister, and then later on with her on her own, for craft books, quilt books, and patterns, and all these kinds of things.
No way. Like I can
And
totally think in my head. I know what
yeah,
you're talking about. Yeah.
and so at an early age, I was exposed to these production skills. I didn't necessarily do them myself, but I went to where, someone would take her layouts, and I helped sometimes a little bit with the layouts, to where these things would actually be photographed and turned into a negative. This was done at someone's house where they had a studio set up for doing this kind of production work. I did some illustration for her for one of the books. And so there was long ago, back before anyone was doing any of the stuff on the computers, you would have these big, massive sheets of letters. And so you'd have probably a couple of dozen E's, because you're going to use a lot of E's, maybe one or two Q's, and you would rub these onto a piece of paper. So I think it was Letraset. And and so she had all of these sheets of these fonts, essentially, in at different sizes, and so I would do some of that work for her as well, rubbing these down onto preset lines that you'd pencil in and all that kind of stuff. And so I had kind of an early experience with that. And then, of course, by the time college rolled around, the Mac was big enough. This was probably about 80. I started college at 87. That was probably 87, 88 was probably my first Mac experience. And so, it pretty easily just kind of led to me being able to take a little bit of knowledge and a lot of interest and keep growing that knowledge and interest a lot more. So,
It's interesting.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say to the viewers at home, one of the questions that I had actually asked was, I'd asked, like, can you tell me a little something about the early stages of learning the craft? And what's interesting to me is that basically it sounds like you grew up with it, with your mother doing what she did, and you were kind of like brought in that respect. And what interests me too is the fact that you were there 4 or 5 years before the Mac, and like desktop publishing had kind of exploded. Because for me, I remember in high school, I'm trying to think, I think it was 8th or ninth grade when I wanted to take like industrial arts classes, because those were for those of you watching, industrial arts is like a shop class, or it's where you make like the sculptures and things like that, and like you build like a mailbox and all that. Anyway, I wanted to take it because they had just gotten the Mac 2 in, I think, and it was just the Mac 2, like it was an old box desktop with like the big display on, and I really wanted to get in with those guys and see how they were laying out their stuff. But you were actually there just a couple years prior to that, working like with the old, I guess it's like cut up layout and design, and you just
before the computer, it was all pretty much cut up stuff, hand drawn lines, these Letraset sheets of pages. You do a lot of work with blue pencils, because the blue would not be photographically caught. So everything you do would be all in black and white, and yeah, it was definitely interesting. I mean, I think I saw the guy with the big old room full of equipment and cameras and gear and all of that, and I thought, wow, that's really cool.
Right.
I mean, at this stage, I am absolutely happy that I'm not having dark rooms and all of this big, massive equipment. I mean, the computers themselves are expensive enough. But yeah, I've always been at least somewhat of a gearhead, and so very early on in college, I started running up credit cards because I was buying the Mac and software. Usually buying the software anyway, buying scanners, anything hardware that I certainly just couldn't just like say copy from the computer lab. Went onto the credit card, and there was. It was not the right way to do it, but it gave me a lot of experience with a lot of equipment, like, Wacom tablets very, very early on. I think I had one by 1990 or 91. I had like 2 or 3 different printers. a scanner, all of these things, a lot of credit card debt. But I ultimately ended up going to school for painting. Actually, I took the 7-year plan in college, and so I spent 4 years at a junior college. I wasn't quite sure what it was that I wanted to do. I kind of vacillated between art and then maybe illustration. I thought about going to New York for school, but realized, that's going to be really expensive and I'm going to have to pay for that myself. And so that didn't happen. But along the way, I also entertained changing majors back to creative writing, to photography, to sculpture. But ultimately, I ended up settling because I had enough of the credits and I could just finally be done for painting. But all along the line, and certainly even with the painting, I was doing a lot of digital art and incorporating the computer into all of these things. And so when I ended up, finally graduating, I knew a painting degree is probably not going to lead to much like directly. But I think before I was officially done with school, I had already gotten a job for pre-press. So I was back doing running negatives, doing computer work. So all of this computer knowledge that I had essentially amassed made me employable that my degree was not going to do for me. So
it's honestly, listening to your experience sounds so much like my own. I did a 6-year plan and I went for a couple of years. I was thinking I wanted to do writing. I ended up actually doing film. And just as you say, film does not, no one goes in, no one's like, well, son, tell me about your film degree. No one's ever said that to me. And I felt like when I eventually got out of school and I did get a film job, it probably had very little to do with me getting the job beyond like showing some sort of proof of theory or proof of concept where I got to do it. Can I ask you one question about computers? And very few people are probably going to understand what I'm asking here, and maybe you won't even. Did you ever own an Amiga?
I did not. I knew some people who had them. I know that it was, at the time, it was a really interesting platform. But I think I saw the writing pretty early on that the Mac was going to be where I needed it to be. And, as a Mac user, there's certainly been some dark days along the road. Some of the 90s was not looking too good. But and I have no problem with like PCs. I've built probably a good handful of PCs myself, so I'm certainly versed in Windows. Although at this point, if I touch it, it's for a very special purpose, special reason that I need that I just don't have on the Mac, and I'm not really that interested in installing, say, Parallels or whatever just to run this one thing. So yeah, I've pretty early on was a Mac guy, and that has pretty well stuck.
No, I was kind of like the same way. I started with a Mac Plus, and then I saw a demonstration of an Amiga like at an electronics boutique. If maybe you remember what that is, no one else there does. But and I was like, I need one of these, and I spent like a whole year saving up for it. But I eventually, as far as the desktop publishing went, I went back to eventually I went back to the Mac when I saw the writing on the wall, and Amiga wasn't really doing that. It was doing more like video processing with like they did like effects for Babylon 5 and stuff like that.
That was through Lightwave was like it essentially started on the Amiga platform. So for me, my early 3D software, I did a lot of 3D work. Still dabble in 3D, but mostly just for like product visualization support. But very early days, I ended up doing 3D work with Electric Image. No one knows of Electric Image. It's at this point, it's been kind of a forgotten software, although it's still out there. And Thomas, I know you're doing a really great job with it. I know you're going to get the next version out, so I believe in you. But Electric Image was the big thing on the Mac for a while. It was like they were using it in Terminator 2. And and a number of big movies. They used it in the Star Wars
Mm-hmm.
prequels,
Mm-hmm.
the movies like Queen Amidala's shiny ship that was all
Mm-hmm.
electric image and all
Mm-hmm.
these things. But um, the uh, but eventually, Electric Image was purchased by a company called Play, and Play was a group that came out of New Tech, which made
Video
Lightwave,
toaster too. Yeah.
and
Yep.
and right, and so I think they were part of those early days with the Amiga
Mm-hmm.
and all of that kind of stuff, and really good at being able to be really optimized and making the stuff look really good,
Mm-hmm.
and still amazingly happening on these really low power machines.
Yeah.
I mean, compared to today, certainly. So yeah, I was peripherally around a lot of that stuff, but
I feel like it
yeah,
was a really fun time. Like, I don't know how you
sure,
feel now, but I mean, things don't there's these little iterations of things that come out, and you obviously have more experience with this than me, but I feel like there was a greater time of discovery, and maybe it
oh
was
sure,
because there was such a shift from everything having to be produced like professionally by big companies to everything being done like on the desktop, like
right,
literally like on desktops. So I kind of miss those days, but
sure,
what I appreciate now is I have more of a salary to afford stuff. I don't have to
yeah,
spend a year saving up. Um,
yeah.
well, let me kind of ask you this then. It sounds like you're a pretty early adopter of say like digital tools and all of that.
I
But
certainly was, yeah.
do you ever miss like I would imagine as an art director now, you probably have to be pretty darn digital, but do you ever miss like the older days when things were more analog, or have you always kind of had this preference for digital?
So I at this stage, I probably personally haven't created anything art wise or what I would consider to be art. I'll do like little detail illustrations or whatever, but
Hmm.
um, I haven't done anything myself personally art wise for way too long. But that said, uh, I think if I was going to be trying to create fine art, I definitely would want to be doing it in a very analog kind of way, mixed media, and really kind of get my hands messy and all of those things. I enjoy working with my hands, and I feel like for art, that's really what would be
Hmm.
important. But if I was trying to do any illustration kind of work that like we do for our products, the digital tools are just so damn good that
Yeah.
it would be really hard. I think that there's probably some visual benefit in small doses for doing it analog, but probably the bigger thing is unfortunately kind of a financial one, and the artists who are able to work in analog, who do an oil painting, for example, or
Yeah.
acrylic or whatever it is,
Yeah.
they're ultimately going to be left with a tangible item that they can then turn around and sell
Right.
afterwards, assuming, however they're working with the client and all of that. But so if I was that kind of illustrator, if I was in today's world, and especially say working for something, let's say like Magic the Gathering, that has such a
Hmm.
huge following and everybody wants the originals and all those kinds
Right.
of things, the traditional being able to work in a traditional medium, you're going to add another 5,000 or more on top of whatever you're being paid to make this piece of art, just by being able to then sell the painting afterwards.
Yeah. It's interesting
So
to like when you mentioned the idea of the benefits of say like the analog version over the digital and all of that. Like
yeah.
I instantly thought of, and again, like I'm probably showing my age here, and I don't know if you probably know who these guys are, but I was thinking of like artists like Bill Cenkevich,
Mhm.
that does like he did of course the New Mutants and was
Right.
very famous for that, and also he did like a bunch of graphic novels with Frank Miller, and like you look
Yep.
at his work and he like pastes stuff. Like there's like he'll
Sure.
paste a mouse or something on there and then glue some lace on it, and then there's like he'll draw a mouth on it, and that's like like that's what I was kind of thinking of when you
Right.
mentioned something like that. Um, Could you tell us a little bit about maybe what you use to in your creative process, like what kind of tools and whatnot? So you've already revealed you're a Mac person.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular, and maybe you talked about Wacom too, but maybe if you
Mhm.
could tell, people might not know what Wacom is or that sort of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about what
Sure.
you use?
Sure. So where I'm sitting right now is my what I consider my workstation where I do my day-to-day work. And so I am working currently off of a 27-inch iMac. It's from, let's see here. I think this is a 2000. It's like late 2015. So we are
Hmm.
sitting now at 6 years old. But it's the 5K one, so it's a really nice bright
Hmm.
screen. It's still a really nice bright screen. It's sharp and all that. And then next to me, I can maybe even pull it over just a little
Oh,
bit,
cool. Yeah.
is a Wacom Cintiq. And I have this thing on an arm.
Oh,
And
cool.
so you can maybe even see there's your
Yeah.
questions. And so this is a drawing tablet
Hmm.
with a screen. And so the Cintiq line of the Wacoms are, just like an iPad, essentially. You can, it's pressure sensitive, you can draw and paint and everything else right there on it, assuming you have the software for it.
Hmm.
I have it set up on an arm so I can kind of pull it down into my lap and do work and all that. But to be honest, I rarely use it. it,
I was
it
gonna.
mostly functions as a second screen, and
Okay.
it's not high res at this point. It's standard definition, 72 DPI, and so sometimes switching from the high def of the iMac to the low res screen here. Um, uh, this one now suddenly looks blurrier and all of that. But
Is it
you know,
is it
go ahead.
because it's a lower resolution that you don't use it, or is it maybe because I was going to ask you like about using, say, a stylus for
Right.
doing layout and design and all of that, or is it maybe because you appreciate you like the mouse better, or is it the
Yeah, it's
resolution?
no, it's definitely at this stage, I'm just really not using a tablet like I used to.
Hmm.
Back in the very early 90s, when I very first got my very first Wacom, it was a big 12 by 12-inch panel. You sit down in front of your keyboard or whatever, and you would use it for everything. You wouldn't use a mouse. You could use your stylus as your input device. But I would use a lot of do a lot of work, say in Photoshop with the stylus and all of that. Um, but over the years, I got to the point where the mouse was just faster, more responsive, more immediate for what I needed. The stylus, even now, if I was doing something on the Cintiq, the Wacom Cintiq over here, it's a little touchy. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't want to use it, say, for layout, because often you're trying to snap to a grid or you're trying to align something, and it's just because it has so much resolution to the tablet's digitizer for picking up where the thing is. It's really easy for it to have really fine motion and movement and
Hmm.
all of that. The mouse is just predictable, and so I've moved away from like having a tablet in front of me,
Mm.
and so almost all of the work that I do is now mouse driven, whether that's in Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, whatever. Um, Unless I need to like maybe see retouch something or actually need the pressure sensitivity, then I might jump over to the second screen for that and do that work. But actually, even sometimes I might just grab my iPad because it's quicker and easier.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's weird, but it's the way it is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
But my day to day is I'm in Photoshop a lot. So like right now we're running a Kickstarter for Plane Breaker. Just before this video chat, I had to make some updates to graphics because we're getting close to the next stretch goal. Yay. And that's all in Photoshop. I have to create all of those things in Photoshop. There's some text layers that I have to maybe update, or I have to swap in a new rendering of the book because the next book is now getting bigger, and so I re-render
Oh,
those things, those kinds of things,
yeah.
and all of those pieces come together in Photoshop, and it's easier for me just to do all of that just by the mouse and keyboard and whatever.
Right.
Some of my day is actually starting to become a little less, but some of my day is often spent in InDesign. All of our books are laid out in InDesign. Used to be up until the early 2000s or so, maybe mid 2000s. Quark was the king for layout.
Quark Express, right?
Yes,
Oh my
yes.
gosh.
And now the only reason I don't touch Quark now, I haven't had Quark forever. But we last year we released, well, actually earlier this year, last year we did the work for Tallis, and so we were pulling old stuff from old layouts, which were all Quark files. Yep. And so I had to convert all of those old Quark files over into InDesign to be able to pull out certain assets and to do that work. And
Oh, that's
yeah,
right. I'm thinking about that because when Ptolus was originally published, I guess, yeah, it would have been Quark that was used. And now,
yep.
so you can't, are you pulling stuff out like copying and pasting, or is it like you can't just change the file or convert the file?
So I convert the file. There's an application. It is from Marksware, and they have a variety of converters, but the converter that I have is one that will do Quark Express files over into InDesign.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they come in, you can kind of see what it used to be,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
it is a mess. It is
Yeah.
all over the place. But the first round that we actually end up doing for like these conversions, recently I did some conversions for Sean Reynolds, one of the designers here, for because he's doing conversions of things like the Bane Warrens,
Mm-hmm.
and so the layout file is essentially the last most edited, most up to date text
Mm-hmm.
file. That's how we have it here with any of our other books too. The latest, most tweaked version is going to be what's going to be in InDesign when we
Mm-hmm.
send it off to the printer. So, so for him, I would do these conversions, and then I can hand him an InDesign file because he has InDesign, and then he can pull the text out and make the updates and do the things as needed. But yeah, so I do spend a lot of time in InDesign. As I said, it's starting to look like it's going to be a little less. Up through this year, I've done pretty much all of the layout on all of the products. There's been, I think, 2 or 3, maybe 4 products in total that I can think of since I've been here until this year that I've had someone outside of us, a contractor, do the layout for us. And so I would prep the file, I would hand it over to them. They would stylize the text, and fit in the art, make it all kind of pretty, and do all the layout work. So we do probably a good 10 products a year. There's been a lot of books. Some of our products are multi-book products.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's been a lot of InDesign work, but recently I've been moving to where much of our layout is starting to happen out of house. I have a few different contractors that I'm working with for this, which is hopefully saving me enough time to be more focused on some bigger picture things, more of the design. I mean, I do all the design work, but I more focus on the design when I'm doing design work. Spending more thought and time for, say, our Kickstarters and that kind of prep. I think it's going to be a good process to be making this kind of growth. So.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you something about that, and maybe I misheard you, or I'm not sure here. Did you say that as the Kickstarter is kind of blossoming and as you reach certain goals, you're making adjustments to the product even then? So it's not like you sort of wait until the whole Kickstarter is over and then you create it, or are you kind of building stuff as it goes? Is that
So it's not the products themselves,
uh-huh.
but the visualization of those products. And so, right now we're kickstarting 3 books,
Mm-hmm.
and a good number of additional ancillary products, a card deck, and a number of other things. We have the deluxe book, we have some big metal tokens, and on and on. And so because we want to show those on the Kickstarter page, I have to visualize those somehow. And so I will, I have them set up in 3D so I can render them. But our next stretch goal will change one of the books. It changes the title of the book, so I have to inject that new rendering into one of the layouts, or into it. Probably actually affected 6 or 7 different files. So I have to get those all over into each of those files and updated and saved out. And yeah, it's so none of the products themselves are changing along the way, but the visualization, what the covers look like, maybe those kinds of things change along the way.
I see. Okay, I got it. I was sort of picturing like this total reshuffling of chapters and like you're stacking things on it. But okay, I see. It still sounds like a lot of work, but I a little bit clearer. Yeah. Maybe it's not as insane as I thought it was, but it's still a little tough.
As far as the other stuff I end up touching, graphically, I use Illustrator a lot. It's not daily, but it's fairly frequent. We do a lot of what I call design bits in our layouts, little symbols or shapes or things like that. And I try to have as many of those as possible as vector pieces. Like all of those little things on all of those things I try to have as vector graphics because it stays sharper and cleaner, and it's easier for me to kind of recolor. All of those details are things where I would go in and create inside of Illustrator. And then occasionally, certainly around Kickstarters, I will jump into a 3D software called Cinema 4D.
Oh, wow.
At some point, I will probably be moving over to something like Blender. But I've used Cinema now since 2008. I used it earlier than that, but I made the jump to where in around 2008, Cinema was going to be my primary tool. And 3D tool, and I've done a lot of 3D work up until I started here at MCG, and now I still use it for product mockups and visualizations. Sometimes I might need to model something in a different application. I'll use tools like Modo, which is a polygonal modeler. I have some parametric modelers where it's more NURBS based or whatever, but then I'll bring it all back into Cinema 4D where I have all my scenes set up with textures and all the books, and so I can like if I know we have a new book, I can grab the book file that I've already used. I can size it to the right page depth, how thick it should be for the page count. And I can swap out the art that wraps around the cover that makes the cover art.
Now, this is a simplistic question here for someone who's just sort of learning, but Cinema 4D, is that where you take flat things like out of something else and you extract them, turn them into something three-dimensional, and you can kind of turn them into a model? Or am I thinking of something different?
So Cinema 4D would certainly do that for you. It is essentially a full-featured 3D application. And so it does, it would allow you to model and create stuff. What you were talking about would be an extrusion. So you could take like a profile from Illustrator, usually the best option, and then extrude it. You can create your own paths and everything else inside of Cinema as well. You can lathe things. You can just start with a cube and just poly model to your heart's extent. You can, they have some sculpting tools. It's not the best for that, but it has animation tools, it has rendering tools. It's a really, really good app, but it has not been the cheapest. And previous to MCG, I ran my own business for about 17 years. Let's see, 97 until 2014. So it's about 17 or so years. And I did a little bit of freelance during the MCG days, but very, very little. But prior to this, I worked as a illustrator and animator. And so Cinema 4D was kind of one of my real primary tools for that, because I would illustrate and animate in 3D. And then all of those renderings would go into an app that's very much like Photoshop, but it's for video, and it's called After Effects. And so I would do a lot of After Effects work on all of these things. And so I have a lot of that as my background. At this point, I've probably forgotten a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
those skills.
it's easy to,
maybe, yeah, it's probably not that I've forgotten. I think they were just very rusty at this stage. But it still gives me knowledge that helps for, again, like these Kickstarters when we run them for visualizing these products and making them look more interesting than, say, just a still flat cover.
Right. Right.
So
cool. Well, so this kind of moves us into and you've kind of given us a very like broad kind of look at many of the tools that you're using and many of the things you do. But can you tell us, what is an art director? What is their function on the team, and maybe how do they interact with other members of the team and with everyone else that they maybe interact with?
Sure. So the term art director can mean something somewhat different depending on the position or where you're working. I think MCG is a more inclusive definition of the term, probably a little bit more like what you would see, say, like it in the agency or some other place. But essentially, if we were a bigger team, I would sit above, say, like the graphic designers, and I would be there to help set the vision of what something is going to look like. That's kind of the very primary role. There's a lot of granular details to that. One of which is being that it also means that that I'm doing all of the ordering of the art and working with the artists, getting the information from the designers of what it is that they want for a particular book, compiling that, organizing it, sorting it out to who I think would be appropriate for those pieces of art, sending it then off to the artists, managing times and budgets and all of those things. When the artist sends that work back in, I then send it back to the team so we can all talk about it together and make sure we're all on the same page. Is this cool? Is this not? And so I have to manage those aspects of it. And then, if there's feedback, I send it back to the artist, and back and forth. So there's off that art director, top level point, there's this subtree of managing assets, managing artists, kind of keeping all of those things rolling and moving and getting what we really want out of it. Then there's the other side, which is the graphic designer side of it. And so, while I do all of the core design and set what things look like, I'm also the only graphic designer here. So I'm my own boss and say, okay, well, now I now have to execute what it is I am thinking.
Right. What was my boss thinking when they told me to do this?
I know, man. My boss he's really bad. So there's a lot of graphic design work. A significant portion of that is for us creating the products, but it's not always. Again, the Kickstarters, they become more and more significant as far as time commitments and involvement. Yeah. But there's occasionally some other things, rarely for me, but occasionally I'll do something that's more marketing focused, graphically or whatever. I design the logos for things, Cipher System logo, and the Invisible Sun stuff and all of those. And then I guess kind of the third leg of the art director stool is managing production. And so I'm part of what we call the production team in-house. it allows me to leverage some of my past experience. As I said before, right after college, I ended up working for a pre-press place.
Mm-hmm.
We no longer really have pre-press places out there anymore, but what it used to be was that if you're going to print something, you needed to have film of that first that you would then take to the printer, the negatives. And so we would do color separations, we would do scanning, high-end, big, massive scanning machines that I assume someone still has out there.
Right.
But we would take people's layouts, we would run them through special turnkey systems. I think I can't even remember what they were called now. You do things like trapping to control the color and all those kinds of stuff, and how the color matches up to each other and all that. But so I had this pre-production experience. Now for MCG, I use that for being able to talk to the printers as far as what it is that we need. And so, one of my roles is getting quotes from the printers, managing those timelines, letting them know if, say, something's running late to help reschedule those projects. I get them the files when they, after they receive files, they send us back proofs. I review those proofs, make sure everything is looking good and nothing we've overlooked something, or maybe something got messed up when I sent out the files. So, there's a production side, there's the art direction and asset management side. And then, of course, there's the graphic design and creation side of things.
That sounds like a lot.
It has been a lot of work. There have been some years that have been more sane and some others that have been less. This has been probably one of those less sane years.
Well, I was going to say, it feels like MCG has put out a lot of Kickstarters the past year or so. I'm very I'm just really impressed at the number of them that have been out, but it makes me.
We've done a good variety of things this year. We started the year off well. About this time last year, we had Heroes of the Cipher System, which is a very traditional type of Kickstarter that we had. But when we did that, we were already starting to talk about what is the next one we're going to do. And so I was already starting to get art going for the thing that we kickstarted, I think in March. March sounds about right, for The Darkest House. So The Darkest House was a completely new thing for us, all digital. And so it had its own needs and demands and all of that. There was a lot of art for it. There's a ton of maps. So there's a lot more asset management than we would normally have, in getting it organized and keeping it organized and all. And then, of course, we did Stealing Stories for the Devil this summer. And we kickstarted effectively 3 games out of it. 2 box games. One of them, the deluxe version of Stealing Stories, having a game within it. But we've been working on that for quite a while. And so and that's there's some crossover, but it's mostly like a completely different set of artists that I'm working on with it than I did, say, with The Darkest House. But nothing else was stopping. We were still producing other books and other things. So there's still other art during these big pushes for these projects. There's still other art that's still being produced, other books that are getting laid out, other things that are getting made. And as soon as we were done with the Stealing Stories Kickstarter, we were already working towards Planebreaker that we had now. So I was ready as soon as that was done to start ordering the covers, because the covers are often the thing that's going to help dictate what everything looks like. And
can I ask, when you say ordering the covers, do you mean you're contacting an artist and you're saying, this is what we're looking for, and can you do something? Is that what you mean?
Yep. So I would, we work with a bunch of different artists. There are certain artists that I've used now at this point for covers. Some I have not. I believe there is a new artist for us this time that I used for the player's guide cover. But yeah, it's it's not only that we want covers, but we want a bunch of art just for the Kickstarter itself to have enough good, fresh imagery. But the covers are the primary ones because I know they're going to take longer. They're kind of the high profile pieces. Artists are going to need their time to get these things finished up and all of that. And so, I try to hit them up as early as I can, give them as much time as possible to produce what it is that they're going to produce for us. Often the descriptions come from the designers of the particular game. And so, I take that, compile it. If there's anything I feel like I need to add to it or whatever, or help pull some additional resources together or references or whatever. And so I'm the one there though to manage that artist or these artists to make sure that they're hitting the timelines and getting everything that we need, in the time that we need it. And
so then if I could ask you, when you order a cover, so here's one, for example, one of my favorites.
Yep.
Are you
Yep.
going to say, okay, we're looking for the monolith in the center, and we'd like a glaive on the side, and then we also want to see the nano in there, and how
How
much is
specific do we get?
yeah, how specific do you get with the artist, and I guess is there a little bit of back and forth with them, or?
Yeah, it depends on the artist. It depends on the product. Sometimes we've been pretty specific in what we're looking for, but it's rare that any particular art brief, like this cover, that cover there, or whatever, is more than maybe like a paragraph of text. Sometimes it's more. Maps almost always are going to be more than that, just because there's specific details that we absolutely have to capture. But whenever possible, I do like to have as much open-ended room for the artist to work within. So like for this, because it was a replacement book, the Discovery book, because it was a replacement for the original Numenera core book, we still wanted the amber monolith there front and center. We still wanted to be reflective of what we had done before, without copying, of course, what we had done before. It was a different artist doing this cover. Kieran Yanner had done the original core book illustration, and so I wanted to capture some of the spirit of what Kieran had done, but also leave room for Lee. This is Lee here. He did both this and the Destiny book cover, and I wanted to give him room to be able to bring his sensibilities and his touch to it. The more I feel like I constrain them and give them too many specifics, the more I'm kind of choking the life out of it early on in the process. I don't want an artist to have to sit there and think, okay, here's 15 or 25 check boxes or whatever that I have to really make sure that I really get in. I want to give them the bones, and then let them make the magic from that.
And what do you exactly, is there something in particular you look for when you mentioned that you're working with a new artist for the new Player's Guide cover? Is there something you look for in their work, in their personality, in some other aspect that kind of gets you excited or makes you feel like this person is going to do some great stuff for us? Or is there something you're looking for?
Yeah, all of the above, certainly. I'm often looking for, the first thing I'd really be looking for is someone who can create some inspiring art. I also want to see consistency. It's nice, I can see when artists have kind of leveled up, and so their portfolio may still have a bunch of stuff that maybe just fresh out of college or something else that is more at the fan art level. And it's, no knock. I mean, I've certainly seen some really beautiful fan art stuff out there, but you can just tell that they haven't really quite found their own style or look or whatever to it. And so, I want to be able to see that they've been able to create a number of good pieces, and that they kind of have their legs under them at this point. But I've certainly worked with some new artists. And I don't think I've necessarily helped help them grow, but maybe, I try to be as helpful as possible, but I want to be able to be inspired and see that they're competent. Um, but it really depends on the product that I'm looking for them for too. I'm less interested in artists who are trying to be identical to other artists
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. I'm often looking for something that's a little bit different or special
Or
or what
weird.
have you. Yeah, there you go. And if someone's really good at creatures, I want to hire that person for doing creatures, but I'm not probably hiring them to do landscapes or people or what have you. And so I try to see what their strengths are and be able to work within those strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, it's depending on how we work well together.
Mm-hmm.
I try to be as accommodating and as easygoing as possible. I think I'm a pretty easygoing person when it comes to a lot of these things. I try to be as flexible as possible for their deadlines and their needs and all of those kinds of things. Um, uh, but I also, I want to be able to find some artists who are also not difficult. And it's been extremely rare that I would ever have that. But it's going to happen, right? Sometimes you just don't work well with someone, and sometimes it's just even if they're great or whatever, we're all part of a team at that point.
Mm.
So I'm looking for people who work well with me, and I work well with them, and all of that. And
Mm.
um, uh, but we are doing things like, say, stealing stories, which has a completely different look than others. And so, the past couple of months, I've been finding some additional other artists to add into our stable just
Mm-hmm.
for that product. It's very likely that I will be able to use them in other ways after this. But I saw something that sparked for me for a particular artist. Like, yes, I'd like to work with you for this. And so I'm always kind of looking out for what is it the next thing that we're working on, and how would we, how can I find those kinds of artists to then bring to the table?
And so, how does it catch your eye? Is there are you I would assume, of course, you've just said like you're maybe actively always looking for that, but
Mhm.
do portfolios come to you? And I mean, do you get like do you get stacks of them and you're like, I just can't go through all these, or um, do you give them each a look, or
Yeah, so we have an area on the website where people can submit their portfolio. I do my best to look at those, but to be honest, that's probably the area where it's the most often overlooked.
mm-hmm.
And so, what's probably better if you're really serious and trying to catch my eye would be to friend me on Facebook or follow me on Twitter and hit me up on those things and say, hey, I've looked at MCG work, and if you're saying that, please have looked at MCG work so
Yeah.
you kind of know what you're talking about. But essentially, kind of get in my face a little bit and say, "Hey, I'm out here. I'm doing some cool stuff. Here's what I do. Can you take a look?" And I'm happy to do that. It's easier for me, I think, to be a little bit more responsive in that way than in the form that comes from the website. Partially because it's that way ends up coming in through email, and it for probably the past 4 or 5 years, email has just been such a mess for me, and so it's easier for me to really just be attentive to the critical stuff email wise, and let the rest just kind of pile up. And when it piles up, then I'm even less interested in trying to sort it out.
Right.
So
It actually
um,
sounds a lot like what I used to hear from like when I'd read about maybe Marvel Comics or DC Comics or whatever, and you'd hear that they're very, they're very actively looking for people, but on the other hand, all of those submissions just kind of stack, and then at a certain point, when like their editor in chief or whatever is like, I have 15 minutes of free time, let me go take the two letters
right,
off the top out of the stack of 17,000, and
right,
I'm gonna see if I can what I can do with these kids.
right.
It sounds kind of similar.
Yeah, there's definitely there's sometimes luck of the draw if I'm finding people within the from the email form. But I have other people, like some artists who recommend other artists. That's a great way, or come through a recommendation and that they email me directly as opposed to essentially bypassing the form. And then what used to also be really good back in the olden days, pre-pandemic times, was to find me at like Gen Con. I would do portfolio reviews at Gen Con. People would come up. I'd take a look at their work. We could talk about it right then and
That's
there.
great.
I can give input if they were open to any input on what I thought was working, what wasn't. If they aren't interested in that, I'm happy just to look at it. And I would try to be proactive and ask, are you showing me this just to be getting work? Are you looking for input as well? Because no one wants unasked for input, and so I try to be responsive like that. But those were good ways of finding some artists, and I definitely found probably at least a handful of artists that I ended up working with that way. And then, of course, just through like Twitter feeds and Facebook feeds, I will have friended someone, and then I see, hey, they're actually turning out some cool work. So I will then reach out to them, email or messaging or whatever. And or just recently, I had an artist share his significant other's art, and she's doing some really great stuff. It felt really fitting for what we're doing with Stealing Stories. So I emailed her, and so she's doing some work for us this way. And so it's all over the place, but
Yeah.
got to catch my eye, I think, is the thing.
Yeah, and it's really interesting the way that it kind of goes with it's maybe the opposite side of what we started out our conversation with when we were talking about like the fact that like the internet is just so addictive and you can get hooked on it and all this
Right.
other stuff. On the other hand, I can just start browsing through my Twitter feed and there are so many artists that I
Oh
see,
yeah.
writers, creators in general, and I would
Yep.
never have even an inkling of their existence if we went back 15, 20 years. I have no idea who they are. And now
Yep.
they're as close as just a little email away. And I mean, I think that kind of like what you're saying, I think that stuff that is ready for it and stands out tends to catch the eye of someone like yourself. And
Yeah.
eventually, like, I think if someone's persistent, it will sort of shine through.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
can we talk a little bit now about so you've got your orders in, you got your everything sort of ready, and what I'm always impressed by the kind of the look and the feel of a Monte Cook
Hmm.
Games game.
Sure.
What I like is the fact that it doesn't inundate you with like all these details. It's very clear and elegant, easy to kind of navigate. Um, if you could maybe speak a little bit about this, how did that kind of evolve, that style
Sure.
evolve? Where did the idea for that come from? Because it's certainly, to me, it seems like a direction that's a little bit ahead of its time. I feel like a lot of games are kind of going that way now, but I think
Hmm.
in the past the idea was to just as much hyper detail and as you could kind of put in there. Now I feel like a lot of games that I see out there. I'm just thinking of some like Blades in the Dark and whatnot. Like they're very nicely, very simply designed, but you can tell that there's a lot of thought that went into the the simplicity. I know that's a
Right.
misnomer though, because it's not really simple. It's not easy to do.
Right.
How did that come about?
So all of that definitely predates me. I've been working here now since 2014, which was the summer of 2014 when The Strange was already coming out or just about
Hmm.
to come out. So clearly it had been laid out. And a year before that was when Numenera had come out. So that had been worked on for a year previous
Hmm.
to it. But you know, Monty is, a figurehead in more ways than one. Um, I think a lot of this was his vision originally. And if you actually look at, let's say, like Numenera, even like even what we're doing currently, but certainly like say the Numenera core book, the original one from 2013. It has a lot of similarities to how the original Tallis worked. This whole sense of, two main text columns plus these smaller side columns for the callouts. Lots of white space and light backgrounds. Just the general structure of how things worked. I'm pretty certain originated with Tallis. It may have come before then, but I think Tallis was the first time where he was introducing callouts. And those actually, that whole idea came out of travel books. So he was creating Tallis to be essentially, this is a setting, this is a world that you're going to travel to as a player and see and experience. And so travel books did these kinds of call out type details.
Yeah.
I can't remember the person's name now who laid out the original and designed the original Tallis book, but a lot of this really traces back to that. And then since then, I don't know how it was that when Monty and Shauna worked with Sarah Robinson, who did the original Numenera core book, but my guess is that there was some conveying of information that here's Tallis is what we really liked before. This worked well for us. We'd like it, updated and modernized and everything else. But Sarah did, I think, pretty much all of the layout for much of the first round of the Numenera products. I think the first Numenera product that I touched was the Ninth World Guidebook. She did the first couple of books for the Strange. So she did the Strange itself, and then the Player's Guide, which is kind of the front matter, the first several pages of the Strange. And then afterwards, it was essentially my tenure, and so of course I took over. And I'd like a lot of consistency across product lines, and so until it makes sense not to be consistent. And so I want Numenera products to look like, even if you have the original core book and then you have the very latest one that has come out, which I think might have been, I can't remember which is the last book that was out, but we're working on Break the Horizon now, and so that's going to be one, the most recent one soon, and that there's at least still some consistency between those two books. Certainly, the way they works the same, and I've evolved and changed, and even from what I originally been doing to later, and but there's still a consistency there that I like, and I do like having some white space. And I've kind of moved a little bit away from the big friendly white space areas for some books, say like Tallis, just because it's so entrenched in this fantasy world that it still felt like it was good to at least embrace a little bit of the sensibility of what fantasy books look like without it being too heavy. Because I do find that like some layouts, some fantasy books, RPGs out there can be a little bit on the heavy side.
Yeah.
And it's great for their looks and for what they're doing for their IP and all of that.
Yeah. But
I still want things to be light and friendly. I want the text to have room to breathe whenever possible. So, yeah.
Yeah, and actually it's funny that you mentioned that, because I thought it was maybe my imagination, but I sort of got the feeling that there was a bit of a difference between, say, the Discovery and Destiny books and then Tallis itself, in that it felt a little bit heavier. I mean, both literally and figuratively speaking, it felt a little bit heavier than what had sort of come before. And to me, like, you're kind of right. Like, I feel like fantasy kind of embraces this idea of like ornate detailing and little too much.
I mean, your fantasy books, you want that parchment kind of look. I mean, everybody does kind of a parchment type background. Tallis has that a little bit. It's just kind of part and parcel of fantasy. But I never want something to be, say, just a shortcut or whatever. But I do want to somehow kind of capture the spirit of the product. and so. But each book has their own needs, even within a product line. So a lot of what we do, I'm as we chat, I'm looking at a layout page from Tallis, but some books, the writers end up writing, say, more words per page than, say, some of the other books, and so we will make adjustments to how things work on an individual book basis, for the most part, I think, like with Numenera stuff, I think Numenera and pretty much all of the Cipher system books, they almost all, I think, share the same text column widths for the vast majority of them. The same core book callouts, or sorry, the callout column sides. I think all of those have kind of the same proportions and all. Tallis, because it was still using text from long ago, even though it's been updated and refreshed and everything else, there's still a lot of text that it's still based upon. And we, of course, had a good quantity of text. There's a lot more text in Tallis.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of change up our margins and column sizes and all of that, just to better provide the space that text needed, that just a different book wouldn't have.
Right. Well, that is, no host could ask for a better introduction or a better segue to what I was going to ask, and what Bear has volunteered here to do for us. I was wondering if maybe you could show us a few pages and maybe just talk a little bit about, like, maybe the anatomy of a book, and so you've mentioned things like call out boxes and column widths and things like that. If you could maybe show us a few things from your end, and so that we could kind of better understand what it is that goes through your mind when you're sort of doing this.
Sure. So you want me to do this? You want me to switch over to the screen sharing, or do you
Yeah,
want me to just kind of talk through it first? And
I think I'm okay to just switch over to it. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're just going to do like a little bit of a flip here. So if you want to just go ahead and share whenever you're ready, Bear, I can just flip us to the other side.
That sounds great. So let me have to find my window here, and I am going to share.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're through the looking glass.
There
I
you
believe
go.
this is the first official screen share I have ever done on the program. So, Bear,
Hey.
can you show us a little bit about
Yeah.
what you're talking
So
about?
what we're looking at right now is this is chapter 3 of Tallis. This is, in fact, the Cipher System look at it. And so each of these are text columns. You can see tiny little triangles here that probably don't get picked up maybe on the video, but this text column links to this one links to this one, and so on and so on. If I turned off preview temporarily, you can actually see how these all link.
Oh, wow. So okay. So you're in InDesign now. You've just turned off
Yep.
So preview mode, I guess, is what it's basically going to look like when it's printed. And so now you're in more of an editing.
This is normal view. The reason I'm almost always in normal view. The reason I'm in preview mode right now is because when I laid this out, I used a specific version of much of this font, the stuff that's colored in orange. And since then, I've switched over to open type versions of these fonts. But if I swap it out in this layout, it kind of messes things up just slightly, but enough that it's a kind of a pain.
Okay.
But so it's easier for me to be in preview mode, but I was just wanting to show these text threads and how you can kind of see how all of these text threads all line up. And so what happens is when we bring the text in, I import the text and it will flow into all these boxes. I have all these boxes linked ahead of time. I flow all the text in, and then I have to go through and style all the text and do all these kinds of things. But
so when you input it, the font isn't necessarily, like, maybe the base font is set, but then you have to go in and add like the headings in there and things like that and change the size.
Right. Yeah. So what I would do is I would typically I import the file. It comes in from Word. It comes in as Word has created it, and InDesign will pick up Word styles and all of these things. There's a whole bunch of different styles that we have, like paragraph styles here. It's a paragraph style window. And some of this stuff is junk, and I just didn't take the time to clean out all this junk. All of these are ones that were imported from Word. But there's paragraph styles, there's character styles. These are on a character level. So like this here has a call out color style on it. But these things get set, come on, get out of the way. As I kind of start doing the layout process. And so I import all this text. I then I apply essentially a base body copy to everything. And then I will start going in and customizing the individual headers. And so this here, major species, this is an H2, this is an H3.
What is H2? Does that mean heading 1 style,
yeah,
heading 2 style?
That's from a structure point of view for these layouts, you would start off with the H1, the header level 1. And so that's the chapter header. And then everything within the body copy is either going to be a regular body copy like this, or it might be this body copy that doesn't have an indent, which we never have indents after, say, like headers. But then we have different levels of headers. And so it helps to show you the hierarchy of the content, and that this content, say, belongs to the previous content. And so H2, goes until everything that's below it is essentially part of this major species text until we get to the next H2, which is NPCs, all the way on page 59. So, but then we have an H3, and so anything that says, when the designers are writing these, they will go in and tag these things. Maybe the editor is doing the tagging, but they'll put a little bracketed tag, a piece of text that says H3 in front of all of, like, so this or this.
So
this one would have
the editor, so before this gets to you, someone is deciding what size it should be, and then maybe you're just sort of fulfilling that size. Is that right?
They're saying which headers are which.
Oh,
so it's
okay.
Probably that should be coming from the designers, but the editors may need to fill it in instead sometimes. But yeah, so a step back, just from a production standpoint. Of course, designer writes all the stuff. It goes through development pass. The creative director is involved and provides comments if it's not written by, of course, the creative director. Then it gets passed on to an editor who does the editing, and then they work with the designer to get it all polished up. But once the text is all fully edited, then they hand it to me, and then I start dropping it into these layouts. So this is kind of a longer chapter. Let's see, this is 48 to 60 to 60. So it's only about a 12-page chapter or so. But one of the very first things I actually do here is I will do what's called a pagination plan. I will figure out, I know what the full length of the book is. I know how many fixed pages we have, things like a credits page or a table of contents page. Tallis has, I think, 6 table of contents pages. We have a multi-page index. I have to figure all these things out.
Yeah.
And then I know how much fluff pages we have with the layout.
What is a fluff page?
Meaning that, it can be variable. It doesn't have to be 6 pages. It could be 7, it could be 5. But I then have to figure out how long is each chapter, how long is each part of the book, those kinds of things, and do all these calculations. And then I can kind of figure out how much space then I have for, say, the art for each of these chapters. But usually by this point, by the time I'm laying it out, I've already figured those things out. Within reason, there may be changes. But Tallis in particular, well, I'll get to that, I guess, in 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the base copy. This is all this copy here. It all flows together. There will be certain copy that will be tagged as to be something in a box. And so I'll create
Yeah.
boxes. Like over here, we have boxes of text here.
Right.
And then some copy is set to be callouts. And so this is callout text right here. These are things that we put off to the side. And if you're really attentive, you might notice that some of these are blue boxes and some of these are red boxes. And so those are different layers. And so Tallis is kind of a special beast, because this is originally when we built this up until we got all the way through to essentially proofing what I've laid out and then making those tweaks.
Yeah.
The 5e version, the 5th edition version, and the Cipher System version existed in one file. And so this file here is set up to show that this is essentially what the book looks like without any system-specific content.
Oh, I see. So you created, okay, so first, let me see if I get this right. So you're using InDesign, and so of course what you did in the first couple layers, and I guess if I get this right, that's like the little layers box off to the right there. The first couple layers are the things that are meant to go in both the Cipher version and the 5e version, like stuff like a setting background, or something like that. It's not going to change between Cipher and 5e. And then you created,
like all of these descriptions of dwarves. There's nothing in here that is system specific. It's agnostic. It's specific to Tallis, but it's agnostic system wise. Yes.
And then so that's why one's dark blue or light blue, because your layers are each color coded. So it looks like the red is the Cipher and purple is 5e. And
so each of these had their own specific needs, of course. And I'll flip through the other pages, but like this is a good early example, the species chapter. 5e doesn't need a box about alignment. Everybody knows what alignment is if you're playing in D&D. You have your chaotic neutrals and your lawful goods and whatever else. But we don't use that in Cipher System. We don't have alignment. There's no analog for that. So we needed a box for that. But it's a big box. That's a lot of text.
Yeah.
That's not just something I'm going to squeeze between something. So for this layout, I made sure to, I figured out, okay, we have this need here. I'm going to put that onto this layer. But now for the 5e version, we need something to fill that space. Yeah. So in this case, art made a lot of sense. And so we could just have art take up that space. Everything flows the same. One thing isn't getting in the way of the other. It's nice and easy, and allows me to then lay out everything as a single chapter and have specific things. The individual species is a good example because, of course, Cipher System, of course, also doesn't have gnomes or halflings or these other kinds of descriptors or these other kinds of things to give you this detail. Whereas in, again, 5th edition, you already have that. And so we would have a lot of empty space. And so I made sure we would have art to help fill up these pages to make these pages still interesting for 5th edition users, and not feel like it was just kind of a throwaway page with just a bunch of empty space, because that's not just not going to work.
Right.
But we can maintain, where this where these start is identical for both products. It's just excuse me, it was just working to make sure that it all fit together. All of this, of course, started with the design team, the writers, knowing that we chatted, we made the decision that this is what we were going to try to do to save everybody's sanity, because there are already 2 huge books. And so they were really good at working through all of this text and really making sure if there's going to be something system specific, we would either go out into these call outs or into special boxes that we could swap out.
So may I ask then, did you do your entire the entire Cipher version first, or the entire 5e version first, then you go back and do the other, or did you kind of do them simultaneously, page by page, or chapter by chapter,
Um,
or a
I think
mix?
in the end, it was a huge undertaking.
Mm.
I probably still have some PTSD from it, but it. I think in the end, I did it side by side,
Wow.
and partially because like something like this, it would be really hard to predict how big one thing is versus the other. And
Yeah.
in this particular case, I had more needs for a Cipher system, because we were putting more text in for Cipher system. So I would work on the Cipher system first, figure it out, and then turn it off and figure out what it is that we need to help fill it out. But I know we had, where's the cosmology stuff? I think it starts.
That's really impressive. Like, has anyone, is this a normal practice?
I
For,
have I have no
you
idea.
guys just made it up as you went along like that. I think
Um,
that's great.
yeah, I mean, we figure out again, all of our products have specific product needs, and so we will
Hmm.
figure it out per product basis. And for the adventures that are coming out for this, they do work a little differently, because we didn't want to have two different print versions or whatever. And so we've kind of optimized how those work versus this. But um, this one's another good example. You can see here that for the base text,
Hmm.
there is, there's a big old chunk that's just different.
Yeah.
I can't remember the reasoning behind it, but there are, for fifth edition, there's probably some very specific, I guess we're talking alignments and other kinds of things, but there's some very specific fifth edition content in here. You
Yeah.
can see these boxes are purple. But I wanted to make sure that in the end, we are ending up the same here, and filling up the same space. And so for Cipher system, it still matches up and hits right at the right spot. Some of it was, creative use of art for like
Hmm.
fifth edition to help use up some extra space. There's some cheats where this box is perhaps pulled up a little bit higher than what I otherwise normally would do. But it allowed
Oh,
for
yeah.
us to, you know, be consistent that I believe even the same beings are on the same page. So Tevra here,
Hmm.
is on the same page for both books. And I think that's the same. Yep. Jode where it ends on one, or Uranus there. It helps also for, say, our indexing and everything else, that for the most part, we can have the same content on the same pages. And yeah, it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
But
That's really impressive. Like, of course I knew that there was going to be the Cipher in the 5e version, and I mean, I thought about how it would be done, but I had no idea that this, I mean, it's very clever. I think it seems deceptively easy,
you're
or
right.
deceptively streamlined, but I have a funny feeling there's a lot of hair pulling involved in something like this.
Yep.
But it feels like it's actually, when I think of MCG, it actually feels a bit like a really good model, because I know that you've been recently kind of thinking about, or doing like sort of simultaneous releases of 5e and Cipher versions, and I know like Plane Breaker
Mhm.
is going, you were going to have that option, I guess, as well. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it
That one won't be simultaneous, but it will be
right,
close.
yeah, I
There'll be a
think
few months. There'll be probably like a
yeah,
few months difference. But yes, that's. I think that's mostly just for our own sanity's sake, that we
yeah.
realize, we really want to make sure we can give each thing its own time, but it's still within reason. I think a pretty close window.
Were
Yep.
the Cipher versions and 5e versions of Tallis released simultaneously, or was one before the other?
I'm pretty sure
I've
they
forgotten.
were. I'm pretty sure they were. They were.
Wow.
They were turned over to the printer at the same time anyway. And yeah, I mean, we built it all at the same time. We did all of the work at the same time. Um, and
I feel like,
yep.
was this a decision that you made, like in retrospect, you're like, perhaps we should have done them staggered, release
Um,
staggered, or?
I don't think so in the end. I think it made sense to what we did. As you said, there was a lot of hair pulling with this. None of mine has grown back, unfortunately.
Well, this is a wig.
You're right. You're right. The this is one that pulled in a whole bunch of people from the team, just to get it out. We often do decent indexes for these books. This one in particular has, I think, about a dozen pages worth of index type material, MPCs, as well as straight index information, all of that. And pulling all of those numbers and getting all of that information in and consistent and accurate and all of that was a large undertaking, and required several members of the team to kind of contribute for those things.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Like it really seems like I mean, it's stunning to think. Like I can't imagine sort of like experimenting with a new technique for something as large as this. Now when you had sort of mentioned something quickly, and I'm not going to be able to quote you on it because I can't remember exactly what you said, but you said something about knowing the number, the page count, or having an idea of the page count. Is that something that's kind of set ahead of time? Do you um, kind of crunch the numbers and say, okay, this is maybe the best number of pages to get within this price range or within the material we have, and then you kind of lock it at a certain number of pages, or does that
So
vary?
so the designers ultimately determine the page count. I think I might go ahead and stop screen sharing, just since we're
Yes.
not really showing anything more
Yes.
to the layout than.
Please. Yeah.
um,
No problem.
yeah. So,
Okay.
so the designers determine the page count of the books ultimately. Collectively, as we are launching these things and developing them through the Kickstarter and making them better and all of that, we often have kind of a general sense of how big a book is going to be. But we want the designer to have the freedom to write to what is correct for the book in that for that product. So Tallis was different. We knew that it was 672 pages previously. We wanted to stick to 672 pages for this version. So we knew we had a cap. But it's probably easier that I would say about like the most recent book that I went through the pagination process of, and that was for Break the Horizon. And so it is it's 144 pages. And so what I would do is I would take the manuscript that's turned over to me, and I would I split it out into all of its components. Table of contents is a separate Word file. The title page is a separate Word file. I don't need a file for that, but I do it anyway, just to be kind of pedantic in organizing myself with this.
Right.
Split all those files out. Then I drop it. And then I have essentially a spreadsheet in Excel for managing all of this, and so I can track how many fixed pages we have, and then how many flex pages, how many pages that can just be taken up by the content, and then I figure out what's my average word per page based upon that. Certain things like with our Cipher System books, where we have the creature listings, each of those are individual pages. Sometimes the designer calls for like a 2-page spread, but I make sure I tally all of that stuff up, get it into my spreadsheet, just so I really know what all is really in this book, how many words are being taken up, or how many pages are being taken up. And then I'll start dropping, or then from there, after I've kind of figured it all out, then I figure out how many words are in each chapter. Divide that by, of course, my estimated words per page.
Right.
And it gives me kind of a rough idea of how big this chapter should be. a lot of them show up as like 3.5 pages, right? I can't do half pages. Our books aren't designed to be doing half pages.
Right.
Sometimes we have a page that's 1.25 pages. That's a tough one. But when we're in the higher numbers, 7, 8, 9 pages, or dozens of pages or more, there's a lot more flexibility to that being 12 pages or 14 pages, depending on how much art I know I have earmarked for that particular chapter. From there, I do my calculations. Essentially, I figure out, then I start rounding things up or down to fill it all in. But the way we build our books, let me see, grab one of these here.
Sure. Yeah, please.
We have, we generally have kind of, for certain product lines, so this is a Numenera book. We have these books built in parts. And so these parts pages, which look, will have something that kind of announces this is the start of a new part.
Right, right.
For the Cipher System books and Numenera books and all that, they almost always start on the right-hand side. They take up one page.
Yeah.
And so part 1 of this book runs all the way to there. But I know this part here always has to be an even amount of pages. So I have to make sure that whatever I've calculated for each individual chapter still adds up appropriately for the part itself. So everything's kind of component-based and part of a different component as well. But from there, then I will build essentially kind of a framework layout. I get the text into each of those chapters. I do a little bit of massaging, see how it's all fitting. Invariably, I'll discover that certain chapters are maybe like really table heavy. So my word count is really off for those, and those probably need some more pages. But I'll see some other pages or some other chapters that don't need as much pages, so I can steal pages from them. And it's kind of a give and take, back and forth. And
yeah.
So there's been I think a couple of my family might be watching me, because there's been like this big old chat thread and because I was stupid to not turn off notifications, I keep seeing these notifications pop up, and it sounds like they were intentionally messaging because of this. But anyway, after all of that, I would essentially kind of get it balanced out as far as how much each chapter really needs. It's a process. It takes a while. I get it down pretty close, and then from there you just kind of make it work, right?
Yeah.
I have so much art. Sometimes the art maybe is a little bigger, a little smaller to help fill in what I need to fill in or whatever. But it, a lot of that heavy lifting is this early work, this pagination, this process of doing all these calculations. And I think that's that's kind of that first big, really meaty, critical part for doing this kind of layout.
Right. Well, I know that we're basically out of time at this point, and I just want to say I think this has been a super fascinating for me.
Mm-hmm.
If I've pleased no one else, I'm glad I pleased me tonight.
Sure.
It's just been awesome listening to what you have to say and hearing how the sausage is made. But I was just wondering if you could tell me anything about maybe a project coming up or something. Like, I know that Path of the Planebreaker is obviously it's like minutes away from ending and all that. But can you tell us a little bit about maybe what you've been working on for that, or for something else perhaps coming up?
So the next thing after Planebreaker, I can't talk about yet, but we will be announcing something at the end of
again.
Yes, we will be announcing something at the end of Planebreaker that I think will be really exciting and different. I think for me, probably what's exciting is trying to. I've been trying to do it for a few years now, but really kind of getting to the stage of actually getting other people working with me for doing the layout work and possibly ultimately even doing some graphic design for me and all of that. As you say, we do put out a lot of products. And so I think it's exciting to be able to get just some fresh blood to it, of course, but also to it kind of leverages my working with artists and kind of working with their time and our deadlines and all of that, but now putting it in for the layouts of the books, excuse me, and the production of things, and that I can be a little bit, I can be at least a couple more steps above the whole process. And I think it's ultimately going to be better for the product that that there are more people involved, and I'm able to have this higher level of control over it. So
yeah, it sounds like you're taking on more of the directing role in the art director title then in that case. Well, for those of you listening and watching, I want to say that, and I usually say this at the end of every one of these interviews. I bring people on that I'm super interested in talking about, and I hope to talk about things that I really believe in and things that I really like. Um, Monte Cook Games does have Path of the Planebreaker that's kickstarting right now. It's closing up soon. I
2 days.
wish I
Yep.
2 days. Okay, so it's closing
Yep.
up very soon. So I do urge you to check it out. But even if you didn't, I urge you to check out their products. I've been a big fan of what they've been doing since Numenera first came out. It really caught my eye, and all of the stuff that they've been producing has really like fired my imagination. I've been using it like in my classroom. I've been using it like the inspiration for it to do like lessons and things like that. And I also use it to have fun with my friends. So I really do recommend that you check out the Kickstarter. I recommend that you check out any of their products. You're gonna like them. Um, Finally, I just want to thank you, Bear, very much for coming on. From what I heard, this is a rare spotting of you in the wild, and I do appreciate you spending an hour and almost, I think it's 45 minutes now at this point. That's a little longer than we said we were going to do, but thank you so much for your time. It's been very enlightening for me, and I do appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank
Um,
you. Thank you for having me on. This is great. I definitely appreciate it. And as I said, I'm not one to chat or usually toot my own horn or talk a lot about what I do. But if you catch me at the right time, I think it's definitely an interesting thing to do.
I think we caught you at the right time because I just had fun from beginning to end. So, for those of you watching and listening at home, if you like the interview, please do think about liking and subscribing and maybe even sharing it. Shares really help me out a lot. I don't get paid to do this. I do this for fun, and it's a little bit more fun when I know that people are kind of watching out there, and I'm helping people maybe inspire them and through what I ask and through my guests. So please do think about sharing, liking, and subscribing. But for all of you out there tonight, thank you so much for watching. Happy gaming, and everybody out there, please do stay safe. We'll see you next time.